Hi, my name is Candice Kelly and I am a homeschool mom to 3 boys. My oldest son graduated from our homeschool last year, so I am currently homeschooling my younger 2 boys. We've been a homeschooling family for about 6 years now, and for the last few years I've been sharing my family's homeschooling journey on my YouTube channel, Homeschool on the Hill. Now in today's video, I'm going to talk to you about homeschooling without busy work. I'm hoping that I can help you find ways to maximize your homeschooling hours. But before we get into that, I want to give you a little bit of background information on me and on my family. Now, growing up, I was pretty much educated in the public school system, kindergarten through 12th grade. My husband was the same, kindergarten through 12th grade in public school. So when it came time to educate our boys, it wasn't something that we really had to think about. It was kind of our default to put our boys into public school. And actually, all of our boys were enrolled at the same school that my husband grew up going to. Now, I'm not going to go into why we chose to remove our children from the public school system, but several years ago we did just that. And it's been a really interesting journey. The reason I give you that background information is because when we first started homeschooling, the background that I have, the background that my husband had, the background even of my children really determined what our homeschool looked like those first couple of years of homeschooling. And for us, that meant a lot of textbooks. It meant a lot of workbooks and tests after everything. It meant public school at home. When I first started homeschooling, I never researched any other educational philosophies. I didn't even know there were different educational philosophies. To me, public school is what education looks like, and when you homeschool, you just try to do that same thing at home. And after the first couple of years, I felt really spread thin, and part of that was because you're homeschooling children of multiple ages, and I felt like I was just bouncing from child to child. I said in another session that I talked about specifically homeschooling children of multiple ages. I felt like a ping pong ball bouncing from child to child. I felt spread thin over everybody having different subjects and textbooks for all the subjects and all the work that came with all of those things, because I was the person purchasing all of the components to everything. And I decided to make some changes. So if you can relate to any of this, I'd like to share just our experience with you and give you some tips that will hopefully help you to maximize your homeschooling hours. So first, I want to make a point that I feel like is really important, because when I talk about wanting to make changes at my homeschool, I was not looking to overhaul our entire homeschool. I'm not a big fan of like massive changes. Those make me anxious. We'd already gone through a really big change, removing our children from public school and becoming a homeschooling family. And so I wasn't looking to, redo our whole homeschool. I had been inspired by some things I had seen on YouTube. I was learning about other educational philosophies, but I definitely wasn't looking at, changing everything in our homeschool. And that's something I would just submit to you, and you can make your own decisions about that. But for me personally, I think that when we make small changes, if it works, great, then we can make another small change. If it doesn't work, then I haven't upset the entire balance of our homeschool just making a small change. And so when I talk about wanting to make changes in my homeschool, I just wanted you to hear me on that and know that I wasn't talking about reinventing everything that we were doing homeschooling, because we didn't. Now, here are the changes that I wanted to make. First, I was looking at combining my younger 2 children, and I talk a lot more about this in the other session that I recorded on homeschooling multiple ages. So I'm not going to go into that a whole lot, but that was something I wanted to see if I could do, because if you guys homeschool children of multiple ages, you know that it's a lot to have all the kids in the different subjects, and I learned that it can be really beautiful, even if you can just find one area to group a couple of kids in. It can really help you a lot as a homeschool mom to kind of have 2 kids working together that you can instruct at one time. And so that was something I wanted to see if we could implement in our homeschool. I also wanted to make time to read aloud. The first couple of years of homeschooling, I think we maybe read aloud 2 books in 2 years, because honestly, we just had very full days. My boys had a lot of work to do, and I just didn't see where we could make time to read aloud. And I knew we were missing out, because the 2 books that we'd read the first couple of years of homeschooling, the boys loved. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience, but I just couldn't figure out how to do that with the way things were in our homeschool at that time. And so that was another area I was looking to make a change. I also wanted to find time for crafts and activities and field trips and experiments, things that I felt like we were always pushing to the back burner. Our days felt so full. The boys had a lot of work, and I didn't feel like we could really make time for those things. They felt like one more thing to do, and I just couldn't figure out how to work them into our homeschool day. I know a lot of you can probably relate. I also was going to see if I could get rid of some of our textbooks. Now, this is not me knocking textbooks, because we still use textbooks in our homeschool even now. So I'm not knocking textbooks. They can be very helpful, but particularly in science and history, those were areas where I was like, these subjects have fun potential. They really do. And I mean, I'm learning things from the textbook, but like, we're not having a lot of fun learning it. We actually kind of felt like it was dry and boring. I felt that way. I know my kids were feeling that way, because they would say it more than I would say it, but I know they could pick up on it from me, because you know, your kids can totally read you. And so I just wanted to see if there were any other materials out there that we could change it up a little bit and not feel like we were doing that same old thing in the textbook with the workbook every day, with the worksheets, with the test at the end of every chapter. I wanted to look at those two subjects and see if we could change things. Now, for the purposes of this talk, I really want to focus on the one area I felt like really has transformed our homeschool. And we are talking about just making small changes. So even though I made some other changes and have continued to make changes over the years, the one change that has lasted and I feel like has been the most significant in my homeschool is when I chose to change our approach to history. And so I really am going to talk a lot about that, but in your mind, you may be thinking of another subject where you're not enjoying yourself or you might want to apply these concepts to, but just understand personal experience for me, we're talking about history. So before we started our third year of homeschooling, I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to combine my younger two boys. I am going to get rid of our history textbooks. I'm going to create amazing unit studies. I'm going to have some history unit studies that my younger two boys can share, and we are going to have a lot of good books in those, and I'm going to read aloud, and we're not going to busy ourselves with all of the little worksheets or workbooks, and we're not going to worry about that. We're going to have more of like natural learning. We'll do some crafts or whatever. And I went to work on creating my own unit studies, and I didn't make it very far. And I'm just going to go ahead and confess that here, that I didn't make it very far because I felt really overwhelmed trying to create history unit studies for my boys. I know other people have done it successfully, but I've just felt like maybe I didn't have that superpower, but I didn't feel like I was going to be able to put that together for the following school year. I felt like maybe I could piece together some little things, but trying to think of like the whole 36 weeks, I didn't feel like I could make that happen. And so I went looking for some materials that would actually support us in this change. Now, my family ended up choosing BookShark, which is a literature-based history program. And I have to tell you guys, I was pretty giddy about finding it. I mean, and this was as a result of Google because I wasn't very familiar with the program, but just finding this literature-based history meant no more textbooks. It meant a whole lot of reading aloud, and I was very excited about that. There were no workbooks or worksheets or tests or anything. It was all going to be a lot of discussion-based, the kind of thing I was looking for. And honestly, they made it really easy to combine my younger two boys because their programs are divided up by levels. They had suggested age ranges, just made everything easy. Everything was there for me, and that is the material that we chose to go with as we made the adjustment to our homeschool for our third year of homeschooling. And I told you guys, just a small change. Just one subject, just looking at doing things differently for history. And it had such a big impact on our homeschool. And I'm going to tell you how. For us, I was very much used to having my two younger boys both have their own history textbooks that I would read a section with them separately at different times. A lot of times our textbooks would have some sort of review question at the end, and review questions, not question, and often a workbook page or pages that would accompany that section that they read for the day. And so I was used to, as the homeschool parent, you know, doing one history book and assignment with one child and then another with another child. And for us to make this change meant, first of all, we weren't going to be separate anymore. And I talk more about this in Homeschooling Multiple Ages, but I have to tell you guys, best decision we ever made to combine the boys in history. Best decision we've ever made in our homeschool because we just were apart a lot, and I don't think we realized how much we were apart. But just having that time together was just huge. And so much so that we're still doing it 4 years later. So not only were they together, but we were learning about the same content. And I have to tell you guys, that is something that I have noticed with all three of my boys over the years. It was not uncommon those first couple of years for everybody to be learning about a different history, time period, historical event, whatever, and just not even be on the same page. And so it was really nice to have two of my boys focused on the same thing. We're learning the same thing. And it didn't hurt that we had all of this amazing literature to read together. In fact, it only helped. I think I talked a little bit more about this in the other session. I'm very, very open about this on my YouTube channel. It's just how much it has helped our family to have this wonderful literature to read together, and we've really bonded over it. Reading aloud was something we did not make time for before, and having it as a part of our history program and having it scheduled out each day just meant we were going to do it. And it was great because it was so enjoyable. It didn't feel like a chore to like something else to check off every day. I had a big mood shift when it came to history, my own mood, and I noticed with my boys, they begged for more when I was reading this literature with them. They begged for more, just one more chapter, and they still do that. Just one more chapter. And I usually, okay, sometimes I do give in. I was going to say, I usually say, no, we're sticking to the schedule, but sometimes I do give in. But when we were in the history textbooks, I never, ever had one of my boys ask me, can we keep reading? Can we read that next section? You know, they weren't that interested. And so changing to the literature-based history program was a huge change for us. It brought us together, had us on the same topic, and had my kids excited. Now, we're supposed to be talking about work and busy work. And I think everybody could define that differently. But for me, busy work is just something that we do because it's there, but I don't really see its value, or I don't really think it has like any real value to my child. And for us, that was the workbooks that we were doing with our history before. We had these workbook pages, and of course you were going to have the expected test at the end of every chapter. It looked very much like school. And that was something I didn't like how much of our day it was taking up for the boys to do those things, and then I check them, and then I'm one of those moms, if you miss something, you have to correct it that day, so I would give it back, they would have to correct it, and then it would come back to me to make sure they corrected it. And I just didn't think that the work they were doing was that valuable. So we eliminated it. And for us, that means that when we were doing our literature-based history, instead of handing them a worksheet, instead of saying open the workbook, instead of saying when we finish a book, now you're going to take a test on it, it's a lot of discussion. A lot of people, and let me just tell you guys, I am not one of those people that says, I'm this kind of homeschooler. I think we're pretty eclectic and we do a lot of different things in our homeschool. But I know a lot of people talk about narration, and I would definitely say Charlotte Mason inspires me, but we are definitely not Charlotte Mason homeschoolers. But this whole idea of having my boys do sort of a retelling of what we've just read, it was such an interesting idea to me. I wanted to test it out, and I found that like kids can tell you a lot. They can tell you a lot more than what's on that worksheet or that workbook page. And I feel like we've tweaked what narration is into our own style of just discussion. Yes, I like my boys to tell me what we've just read, but I also want to hear their opinions on things. I want to know how it made them feel. I like to hear what they think will happen next. And these were things we weren't doing with our old history materials. Now, if my kids were in here right now, they would be backing me up 100% when I say that making this small change in our homeschool just changed the mood in our homeschool. We actually start our homeschool day with our history, and it's because we really enjoy it. We enjoy our discussion time. I was telling my husband, I guess not too long after we started the BookShark program, I said, I feel like when we read these books together, and let me be clear, these are not just good books. It's not just something to entertain your child. Okay, first of all, they're good books and they are very entertaining, but they have historical relevance. So we're not in a textbook, learning dates and historical figures. Instead, we're reading some amazing piece of maybe historical fiction. And maybe the characters are made up, but the events going on around them are very, very real. And I told my husband, we get really emotionally invested in those characters. We have like our emotions stirred, and I will tell you that never happened in our history textbooks before. And it has just been the most precious time. But I know a lot of people think if it looks different than that traditional way of doing things, then it may be lovely, but if they're not giving you a workbook page or pages or worksheets or taking a test at the end of every chapter, how do you know they're learning anything? And I'll tell you guys, I would have said the same thing that first couple of years of homeschooling. And I have to tell you, you sort of find your way with it. It took me a while before I was really confident in assessing that my boys really knew this information. It took me a while to trust that. And now 4 years in, I don't really give it a second thought anymore. Now, I'm not against testing. We still test in some areas of our homeschool, and I can see its benefit for sure, but it's not the main focus of our homeschool. I came across a Winston Churchill quote I wanted to share with you guys. It's about testing. He says, "I should have liked to be asked to say what I knew. They always tried to ask what I did not know. When I would have willingly displayed my knowledge, they sought to expose my ignorance. This sort of treatment had only one result. I did not do well in examinations." Now, it sounds really simple to just ask them to say what they know. It sounds too simple, but it really is that simple, and it really is effective. I think sometimes as the homeschooling parent, we feel a lot of pressure, right? We have such good intentions. We want to make sure that our kids are learning. And so sometimes we think if there's not a certain degree of struggle, then they're not being challenged enough. That if there's an ease to it and we're enjoying it, then maybe it's wrong. And I'm here to tell you that's not really true. You can learn and enjoy while you're learning. It doesn't have to be a struggle, and it doesn't have to look the way you always thought school looked, and maybe the way school looked for you. Homeschool can look different than that and still be effective. Now, there have been some real perks to changing our approach to history and the work we do for history, or the work we don't do for history. And one thing is it's been a time saver, which I feel like I've already touched on. Time saver for my boys. They're not doing all of this busy work with their workbooks and worksheets and things they weren't enjoying anyway, and I'm not having to grade it all. Another thing is that we can do this anytime or anywhere. If our homeschool day gets thrown off for whatever reason and we don't have time to have our discussion after reading our history, we can put it off until dinner time. We've done that before, and it was a treat because my husband got to participate. Usually he's gone when we are doing our homeschool day, and so if we save something like that for the dinner table, he gets to be a part of it. And I said anywhere because we could be finishing our history time and need to hop in the van and go to the orthodontist, and we can totally have a discussion about what we've read in history in the minivan. The minivan is a perfectly acceptable place to have discussion. Now, the last thing is it's just more enjoyable, and I feel like I've really covered that here, but let me just say it again. It's more enjoyable having discussion time and getting to hear my kids, what they know, what they think of something, what they think is going to happen next. It's just more enjoyable than getting my red pen out and grading a workbook. It just is. So I know I've talked about how I'm at peace about not doing this busy work when it comes to our history, and how I feel like discussion is a great way to assess whether or not my kids are learning. And I know that not everybody feels that way. Some people, they want to have something in their hand, or you might live in a state where you're required to submit some kind of evidence of learning. So I want to give you just a few ideas, some very tangible ideas that you could use with your kids that could take you out of the workbook but still give you the work that you feel like is meaningful and valuable, maybe help you build a portfolio. One of those things is written narration. I talk about my kids telling me what we've read and summarizing what we've read that day, and they just tell me, but you could always make your kids write it down. And if you're like me and you decide to combine children of multiple ages, all you have to do is adjust your expectation depending on your kids' ages. So if you have a 3rd grader and a 6th grader, you would just adjust the expectation. You would not have expect as much from the 3rd grader as you would from the 6th grader. Also, book reports are another great way for you to have a piece that you could submit if you had to. And it especially works when you are reading the same book aloud because you know all about the book. And so you can have realistic expectations for that younger child and the older child, but you're very informed on the book. And so it really helps when you're all doing that together. Also, lap books. Lap books are another fun way to have actual tangible evidence of learning and they're very customizable, and they have all these different components with them. And I believe that BookShark offers, I think in almost every one of their history programs, they have lap book kits now. So they kind of do all of the work for you. And those would be great things to submit if you had to have some sort of evidence of learning. Also, I know notebooking is really popular in the homeschooling community, and there is just a ton of information on the internet about notebooking in your homeschool, and so that's something else you could consider. And then don't forget, if you do have to do portfolios, to include the things that are not necessarily like pencil to paper. So include pictures of things like any activities or crafts that you do, field trips that you go on. Make sure to include those in a portfolio. Those are all evidence of learning as well. Doesn't have to be a workbook. It doesn't have to be a test grade turned in. You can show that you are learning, your kids are learning in their homeschool. You're learning too. I've learned a lot in this homeschooling journey, but you can easily show that through pictures along with some other samples like from what I've already mentioned. Now those are just a few ideas. I'm sure if you think on it, you can come up with something even more out of the box. I feel like as homeschoolers, we're really good at thinking outside the box, but I think sometimes we are so used to doing things one way, and maybe that's our background, certainly my background, that it can be a little scary to change something, even if you're feeling uninspired by it, even if you're not sure it's really effective, even if you don't see its value. It can be hard to pull away from that just because, I mean, if you're anything like me, you're conditioned to think this is just the way you do it. But there's more than one way, and personally, if you find yourself in that place, I would not suggest making major overhaul to your homeschool, but possibly seeing where you can make some small changes. Maybe just spend some time really evaluating the work that you have your child or children doing each day and decide, is this valuable work? Is this worth their time? Is it worth my time as the homeschooling parent to grade all of this or look over all of this? Is this really how they need to be spending their time? Is there a way that we could spend our time that's more enjoyable? And if there is, make that small adjustment. Make your homeschooling something that you enjoy. Because I'm going to tell you, if you're not enjoying it as the homeschooling parent, your kids are going to pick up on that. And they're not going to enjoy it either. And I know that puts a lot of pressure on us, but there are ways to enjoy your homeschool. You may find just making a small adjustment may do that. One small adjustment may lead to another small adjustment, may lead to another one down the road, and that's okay. We're allowed to do that as homeschoolers. It's one of the things I love the most about homeschooling. Now, I know I mentioned my family uses BookShark, and if you want to know more about the programs that they offer, you can visit their website, BookShark.com. And if you like homeschooling videos, please come and visit me at my YouTube channel, Homeschool on the Hill. I talk about homeschool curriculum. I share monthly updates on how things are going in our homeschool. I share what we're reading and all sorts of other homeschool related content, and I would love to have you as a part of my online homeschooling community. I want to thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me today, and I wish you all the best in your homeschooling journey.